Welcome. We overestimate impact of new technologies in the short term and we underestimate it in the long term. This quote has been attributed to everyone from Bill Gates to Arthur C. Clarke and numerous other scientists and technologists. Today we find ourselves as businesses, especially technology businesses, at the precipice or perhaps in the midst of yet another such revolution. Whether it's just another hype cycle or is it a reality, something we need to worry about, something we need to prepare for as business leaders? That's the question today, and perhaps more importantly, how we can tackle it, how we can best use it. Joining me today, Sima Sadaseva, co-founder and CEO of Usher. Welcome, Sima. And Anthony Macciola, former CIO, CTO to Fortune 500 companies, Kofax, Abby. Anthony, thank you so much for joining. Sima, you've talked about generative AI being misleading. Mind telling us why you say that?
Yeah, look, when every problem, if you have a hammer in your hand and every problem looks like a nail, it's important for us to clarify, right? So that's what it feels like. Um, Generative AI, as exciting as the technology is only one sliver, right? There's lots of underlying infrastructural improvements, enhancements, changes that has happened in the world of AI. Um, it's probably important for us to kind of take a quick step back um, and also define what AI is or it isn't, right? Um, I always like to go back to our world of insurance, right? In fact, if you look at actuaries, right? Data science, machine learning models have been used by actuaries for almost 20, 30 years now. The earliest machine learning models were actuarial sciences as opposed to data sciences, right? So, um, predictive analytics is another area where machine learning has really transformed and created analytics and insights. Um, Predictive input text, with technology that we've all gotten to use over 20 plus years. The earliest digital assistants where you could start to type and it would predict the next word. Input predictive text, that was also a rudimentary early implementation. The rectangular boxes that your cameras used to put, your digital cameras, if you remember, we are old enough. Many of the young people don't even know that they could, take pictures of them with their cell phones, right? Those rectangular boxes were basically machines trained to recognize what looks like a human face, right? My point is, I think our evolution, by applying machines to understand information and get trained on, has been, in existence for 20 plus 30 plus years now. um, it's an inflection point now because these models or machine learning models have gotten bigger and better over the years. Um, but the technology itself is pervasive. It applies to multiple modes or what we call multimodal, right? Um, you can apply machine learning to the world of language and linguistics. We've been dabbling with natural language processing, natural language understanding at Azure for almost 7, 8 years now, right? And you can apply machine learning to synthesize voice. You can apply this to the world of documents, a world you've spent a lot of your career working. We can apply this to images, computer vision, big area. So my point is, generative AI is one small piece, right? But the underlying infrastructure that made all of this possible is now what we call large language models, right? So it's important to, acknowledge and give some credit to the infrastructure that made, that ChatGPT as exciting as it has become.
Makes sense. Now that we've established why you think generative AI is misleading and the focus should be on large language models. Anthony, in terms of the real life applications of large language models that exist today or maybe in future, any thoughts on that?
There's so many, right? So where to start? One that probably resonates with a lot of people will be listening, right? It's been a challenge for many organizations is contracts, right? Leases, purchase orders, things of that nature. And how do you ensure that you're GDPR compliant, right? Typically, these documents are unstructured, unpredictable, long, right? And the information that you need to determine whether you're compliant is just scattered throughout them. So, how do you determine who the constituents are, who the parties are, what's the relationship, what are the terms, right? What provisions are in the documents? Are there provisions that you need to ensure you're compliant in this document, right? If you went back a year or two, the services component required to try to put together a system to do that from an intelligent document processing standpoint, an IDP standpoint, would be material, sometimes prohibitive, cost prohibitive. You fast forward to today with large language models and their ability to simplify classification and summarization of information in unstructured content. It makes it such an easy problem to address where it opens up that use case and makes it viable for organizations that probably were either still doing it manually because they just couldn't afford to kind of build the rules and code to do it in a bespoke solution. It opens up whole new arenas, and it actually allows a lot of organizations kind of in the mid-market who would have never been able to afford to do this to be able to deploy solutions that are viable for them.
Yeah, I mean, talk about mid-market companies. Even Usher, I mean, if I go back to, 3 years back, right? There was no pandemic, right? Prior to 2020, right? This definition of force majeure, you know, did not include the pandemic, right? And going through the experience of having to navigate with my landlord for our lease and navigating that, now I want to make sure that every contract that we sign has that force majeure include the pandemic or coverage for a, a pandemic like event, right? Now if I were to run a project like that today to look at the hundreds of contracts we have, it would be a significant services involvement or engagement, right? I mean, we can absolutely rely on a large language model to help solve for.
And that's where the technology is today, right? Think of where the technology wants to go or is going, right? Ultimately, you want to extract all that information from your contract so you can analyze it, determine by yourself whether or not you're compliant. The models want to get to a place where you can just have them determine whether the contract's GDPR compliant for you. And if it's not, why? Right? From a reasoning standpoint or an analysis standpoint, the value for a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 1000 company that might have tens of thousands of contracts, right? And trying to manage those, the value is incredible. So that's just one example, right? Think of healthcare, think of patient records, think of insurance, right? There are similar applications or use cases to that where the application of large language models to help process and understand very challenging documents is going to dramatically simplify the world for many, many organizations.
Yeah, I think about other applications, just the experience, right? I believe fundamentally search is going to be changed, right? The way we look for information, the way we search is fundamentally going to be turned upside down, right? Um, whether it is the employee experience or the end customer experience, I think the way we are looking for information is broken today from my perspective. If I were to look for something in my own intranet, there are like a million different places where artifacts may be kept. And the power behind generative AI, I go back to generative AI, not large language models, is that it's definitive, whether it's right or not, right? It's definitive in giving you an answer, right? Rather than providing you 50 different links to where those artifacts are. So I fundamentally believe that search, as we know, will change.
So let me get this right. When you say search, today when we say search in general terms, we mean going to most often to Google and typing some search. You're not talking about that. You're talking about an employee searching for an artifact within their database. Intranets have been around for 40 years. What's changing now?
Both the experience that we enable employees to look for information, they're not just looking for information, they're looking for answers to questions. They're looking for business processes. They're looking for some help, right? They're not just looking for a document per se, right? Search almost always refers you to go read something else as opposed to giving you a way to solve for your problem. So I think the way the technology can be harnessed is to actually solve specific problems. That's where we talk about experience and experience creation or experience automation as the holy grail of where the industry is going.
The answers, if I could summarize that, the answers will become more context sensitive. If I'm searching for a piece of information, it won't just throw out a document or a list of links. It will give me a completed answer like ChatGPT does today, given it has its own, hallucinations and all those, worries. But within a confined environment of an enterprise, we could make it much better. We could make it much more reliable. That if I, as an employee, am searching for a piece of information, the answer will be much more reliable, especially if I'm in a healthcare organization or insurance organization.
For sure. I think, but it takes multiple steps to get there, right? So this is where I think this debate about large open models that have been trained on public domain or data in the public domain versus data that's very specific to a line of business, very specific to a domain, or very specific to an enterprise. I think it makes a huge difference. I think it's a point of conversation for sure, right? Where the industry is going to go towards. The efficacy of augmented models with a company specific data or a domain specific data versus a large open general purpose language model.
So I'm going to request to hold that thought because we are going to get into domain specificity in much more detail. But Anthony, I have one question. Why am I still dealing with documents and faxing documents to my healthcare organizations? This is the 21st century. Isn't it about time?
I wish I knew, right? Especially fax documents. No, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and every couple of years there's an analyst prediction that documents are going to go away. Never happens, right? Maybe the volume of hard copy paper documents diminishes, but they just translate into digital documents, right? Which still creates a challenge when you're trying to automate an experience or a business process, right? Because so much of the information that drives that process is locked away in that document, right? And whether we like it or not, as humans, we like things we can touch, we like things we can reference, right? And a document is an artifact that represents a transaction. It's referenceable, it's an audit trail, right? It's something we can refer back to, either legally or just from a retention standpoint. So I think whether or not we like it or not, documents are here to stay for a long time. And they will be, in large part, the backbone of many compelling business processes. So the challenge for organizations, right, is how do you unlock the information that's in those documents to drive the experience? And historically, that process has been very services heavy, training the technology, the legacy technology in the intelligent document processing market to parse that information and classify those documents as being very challenging. I think the biggest impact AI is going to have, generative AI, large language models is going to have, is dramatically collapsing and simplifying the process of training um, systems to be able to classify and parse that information. So the days of needing thousands of samples and all of that are going to go away. And the ability to have general purpose models that understand how to get information out of a lease or a purchase contract, or how to process an invoice or a utility bill, are just going to dramatically simplify that and will allow, well, the net result will be quicker time to value, right, for customers, and lower total cost of ownership. And the net result will be, when you're automating an experience or a process, the ability to unlock information in content related to that will just be dramatically simplified.
So this discussion we've been having for I don't know how long, this structured versus unstructured data and all that 80 to 90% of an enterprise information being locked in unstructured documents and emails and deciphering all of that. I think that's a topic for another time, but your contention is that generative AI and LLM specifically are going to, resolve some of those.
Oh, I think it'll have a massive impact in the cost component of deploying those solutions.
Also the ability for large language models to parse through unstructured documents, and you're talking about reasoning engine,
Yes.
the ability for these machines to get trained on understanding the semantic of a document and extracting the most important business indicators or key business indicators as companies would.
It sounds simplistic, right? But when you take something as common as processing an invoice, what do you want to know? Should I pay it or not? Right? Language models should be able to help determine that based on the right infrastructure behind them. So I think they're going to make a big impact in many document-centric business processes, and they'll definitely make an impact in customer experiences that are dependent on content.
So talking about documents, customer experiences, and not just documents, but a lot of it is logged in email. And triaging that, Usher has solutions and Usher has customers. You want to say a few words about, because there is a whole entire world of email automation, but in many different aspects. How do you see, and of course, sentiment analysis and IBM Watson has been around for well over a decade, but what are your thoughts on that part of the world before we go back into LLM?
Look, I mean, I use the word multimodal, right? So multimodal, when we talk about multimodal, it's multiple modes, multiple channels of interactions, engagements, be it text messages, voice calls, phone calls that you may make, digital experiences instead of going to a website or a portal, having those fluid experiences that are very conversational, very natural, applying linguistics capabilities or natural language understanding and processing capabilities to the world of emails. All of this is, from my perspective, a very holistic way that you can leverage AI to solve our problems, right? So we see companies routinely receiving tens of thousands of emails to centralized mailboxes. The question that you're asking about, how does Usher apply AI to the world of emails, right? It's not just understanding what that email said. It's to look at the key business indicators, extracting them, looking at the attachments, making sense of whether or not, there are important pieces of information to extract, to write into systems of records, to create audit trails, and to even get to inferences, right? So we're talking about reasoning engines, how we can apply these machine learning models, whether or not the quote request that that broker is asking you to send is high risk or low risk or medium risk, right? The ability to get to um, understand the implications of a business decision can be uh, enormously changed by leveraging AI, by leveraging technologies like LLMs.
So first notice of loss and those kind of applications within the insurance industry.
On the servicing side, for sure, there are post acquisition journeys, whether it is enabling a claim to be processed faster or collecting missing information to complete some workflow, adjudicating, a beneficiary. Um, all of these are experiences that we can absolutely um, change non-linearly by applying AI. So just to complete that thought, um, when we talk about centralized mailboxes, companies routinely receive these tens of thousands of emails, and we have solved for this problem very specifically at a few financial services and insurance companies. Unum, one of our beloved customers, they've been a customer of ours for a long time. They have this centralized mailbox where employers are sending them emails, tens of thousands of emails on an ongoing basis, and they leverage Assure's NLP capabilities to triage those emails, to extract key pieces of information right into their back office systems of records, and they're able to make again an exponential impact to their business, both in terms of the time it takes to reduce the time it takes for them to respond to these customer requests, as well as the operational cost to servicing that request. Both of these are very important parameters, and we are able to make a huge dent on both of those parameters.
So it has a real life, impact. It's not just that I can read an email and I can decipher and make some sense out of it and reroute it. It has, cost, benefits in terms of.
For sure. That's why I keep talking about this being such an inflection point, because it's not just a forward-looking pie in the sky, technology. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? In terms of applying this to today's problem, to yesterday's problem, to make a better tomorrow, right? So that's where we have really enabled a lot of our customers to take advantage of the capabilities that these machine learning models have the ability to solve for.
Now let's go back to our the point where I stopped you from going into domain-specific large language models. OpenAI and similar open public large language models have been trained on trillions of data points, trillions of parameters, but they come with their own drawbacks, their own hallucinations, if you will, and that makes it very concerning for decision makers in healthcare and insurance providers and financial any regulated industry. You can't just pick up a LLM and start using it because there are repercussions. Any mistake costs, it gets multiplied easily. What is the answer here?
I think it's a very similar parallel to how the cloud evolved. Cloud has been there. We've been talking about cloud for 20 plus years, at least 20 years in the making, right? And there's always companies that are incredibly wary of letting go of customer data, not because they are afraid of it, but they are regulatory constrained in terms of what information they're allowed to let go beyond their perimeter, right? So I do think that the compromise that companies in regulated industries made with virtual private cloud where they came up with their own cloud versions, but in a much more controlled environment as opposed to public cloud systems, right? I do see a similar parallel in the world of LLMs as well, where you can leverage and take advantage of the technological advancements that have happened, but at the same time, put considerable guardrails by either creating your own domain specific, company specific large language models, or leaning on this notion of build versus buy, leaning on companies like Usher to provide that solution for them. And I think the barrier eventually will be dictated by access to talent. I think not every company will have the know-how to, or the talent to solve for those problems, right? You have to hire an army of people to apply and transfer train these models for your specific business, right? And many industries have challenges having access to bleeding edge tech workers, and so that's where I am willing to bet that it will be a build versus buy rationalization that has to um, be answered, and each company has to make that determination on their own.
So it seems like we are asking the insurance companies and healthcare companies to stay being subject matter experts in their world and not try to become technology experts because it's an expensive endeavor. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Their ability, the opportunity will be, how do they translate their domain knowledge, policies, procedures, best practices, right? And how do they take that and leverage it or apply it on top of a language model, right? And I think organizations like Usher can definitely be an opportunity for them to do that without having to build up that expertise, right? And I think we talked about this before. There's two aspects of this, right? There's the actual domain specific large language model that includes the DNA of that organization, and that helps you reason, make decisions, make recommendations, right? But that sitting there on the shelf all by itself is useless unless you've got the delivery vehicle that is driving the conversations, right? And has the back end automation and system of record interconnectivity, right? All of that infrastructure in place. You need them both to have a successful deployment, right?
So not just the language model itself, that's just the answer. You need a vehicle to deliver the value, whether it's customer experience or whether it's employee experience.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't claim to understand insurance better than our customers do, right? I mean, they've been in the business for decades, if not, hundreds of years, right? Many of
true subject matter experts.
They understand their business better than it's like teaching an old man how to cough. You can't do that, right? So, but the point I'm trying to make is we are experts in experiences, in creating the best breakthrough experiences. I've spent 20 plus years of my career, solving for and championing for that. And at Usher, we have many people who are focused just on creating the best experiences possible. So the point I'm trying to make is, while we do have industry expertise, our ability to marry the experience automation piece together with that industry knowledge and by virtue of having solving that problem for tens of customers, right? You're not solving for that specific problem as one company. We have solved that problem across the industry. So working with someone like Asher would give you the advantage and the benefit of leaning on a solved problem that everyone in the industry can take advantage of.
So there's the cost aspect of this as well. And we've seen that I think the analogy of cloud comes back here as well.
Yeah.
That you can start with AWS, not a problem. You're a startup, great, you get started. The moment you start scaling, the cost scales with it. Do you see the same issue, plaguing LLMs as well, especially the open source, OpenAI, sort of not open source, but bigger LLM?
You'll see a big smile because I could never have gotten this company off the ground if it was not for access to technologies like AWS. I remember it was just $400+ to get an instance. A developer instance was almost free until we had to get a customer instance going. Um, it sounds incredibly attractive when you get started, but before you know, the costs add up. Why? Because there's a paraphernalia of infrastructure and other applications that you have to add to your bare bone instance, right? To make that bulletproof, to secure the perimeter, to make sure that you are load balancing it. So into the world of LLMs, I see a very similar parallel, right? So while it feels super attractive with the cost of the API interface into an OpenAI or into an Azure, or take your favorite interface. Eventually, I think with the guardrails, with the compliance, and I see a roadmap where there's a host of affiliate services that you need beyond just that simple API interface that you currently have today, to make sure that you have guardrails, you're not hallucinating, you're securing customer data. All of these things will eventually come into play, and cost will become a consideration, but it will become commoditized. That's the reason I keep talking about this as infrastructure, because it will be commoditized to the extent that you don't worry about this cost as significant. For the same reasons, I'm not going to go build my own data center, because that's not our core business, number one. Number two, it's a solved problem, and someone else can solve that problem at a unit economic that is dramatically different if we were to go solve that problem. I see LLMs akin to that infrastructure.
So we've discussed the cost aspects of LLMs, especially domain-specific LLMs. There is the data privacy, compliance, governance side of it. How do you put it in context of, again, our analogy about cloud versus LLM?
Yeah, I think it comes back to some of the points that we talked about, right? It just reinforces the the direction towards domain-specific language models, right? Organizations, whether they want to or not, are many instances going to be prohibited from putting their data into an open forum. So from a privacy standpoint, it wants everything to go into the direction of having, don't know if the term corporate language models will become a real term, but it essentially wants to go that direction, right? Where the DNA of their company, whether it's document examples, policies, procedures, best practices, security provisions, whatever, they want them in models that are specific to them. How they build those models will definitely be a challenge and an opportunity, right, going forward.
So we've talked about LLMs and GPT and ChatGPT and generative AI in general in many aspects. What does it mean, where the rubber meets the road? What does it mean for the human experience, especially in the enterprise?
In any context, I think the problems we are all trying to solve for are to enhance the experience, to personalize the experience. So you will hear more and more companies talk about hyper personalization. Right? Business process management platforms have talked about next best action, um, predicting what the customer would likely do next. There are customer data platforms that tune in into all the signals customers are giving, right? But eventually, it will be about the experiences that you're creating for your users. And I've always made this case that the best experiences are almost always the ones that are automated, self-service, traffic light versus traffic cop, ATMs versus walking inside the bank. So experience automation is the frontier. It's the next, focus area. I believe that can drive enormous value to businesses, and leveraging technologies like LLM will put you on a faster track to get those best experiences possible. So I'm willing to bet that every company, will eventually get disrupted if they do not focus on that experience creation. And the analogy is leveraging LLM is akin to being on a freeway without traffic lights.
That's a great analogy. I think that's a great point for us to wrap up this conversation. We started talking about overestimating the impacts of technologies in the short term and underestimating them in the long term. I think our conversations prove, if anything, that there's a lot more to come when it comes to generative AI, it comes to ChatGPT, it comes to especially domain-specific large language models. Sima, thank you so much. Anthony, thank you so much again. My name is Kashif. We'll meet again in the next round of our fireside chat with generative AI experts again. Love to see you there again. Thank you.